Most people think an avoidant man walks away because he doesn't care. They think his silence means indifference, that his distance means he's made up his mind. But what I've learned after working with thousands of men and women around the world is that avoidance isn't about a lack of love. It's about a lack of awareness. It's about someone who has never truly looked beneath the surface of their own emotions long enough to understand what's actually happening inside. Awareness is the first step to freedom because you can't change what you won't face. The avoidant man doesn't leave because he wants to, he leaves because his nervous system is screaming for safety. When things get too real, when the emotion gets too close, something inside of him says, run, not because he's weak, not because he doesn't care, but because somewhere in his past, closeness became associated with pain. Maybe he grew up in a home where vulnerability was punished or where love was unpredictable. One moment warm, the next cold, so he learned to protect himself. He built walls, and those walls became his identity. But here's the truth. Protection and peace are not the same thing. You can protect yourself so well that you end up isolated, living behind invisible glass walls, watching life happen but never fully feeling it. Awareness shatters that illusion. Awareness says, wait a second, maybe the threat isn't out there. Maybe it's in here. That's when the real transformation begins. When a man starts to see his patterns, he starts to understand his reactions. He begins to recognize that his instinct to pull away every time someone gets close isn't strength, it's fear disguised as control. And when you can name that fear, when you can look it in the eye and say, I see you, it starts to lose its power. Because the moment you bring light to something that's been hiding in the dark, it begins to dissolve. Awareness isn't about blaming yourself or anyone else. It's not about saying, I'm broken. It's about saying, I'm learning. It's realizing that the stories you've been living by, stories like, I'm better off alone, or people always leave, are not truths. Old survival strategies, and survival is not the same as living. Awareness invites you to shift from survival to creation, from reaction to intention. The avoidant man, once he becomes aware, is to notice the little moments that used to send him running, the quiet expectations, the uncomfortable silences, the subtle emotional demands. And instead of reacting automatically, he pauses, he breathes, he stays, maybe for a moment longer than before. And that moment, that pause, is the beginning of a new story, because what keeps most men stuck isn't the fear itself, it's the lack of awareness that it's fear. They call it logic, independence, focus, ambition, anything but vulnerability. They keep busy so they don't have to feel. They chase success so they don't have to confront the emptiness that waits when the noise fades. But the truth is, the life they're chasing will never feel complete until they learn to face what's happening inside. Awareness is the foundation of every breakthrough. It's not comfortable. It's not glamorous. It's honest. And in that honesty, something shifts. That's when a man starts to realize he's not running from his partner, he's running from himself. And when he sees that, really sees it, he begins to turn around. He begins to meet himself where he's been avoiding all along. So if you want to stop running, if you want to stop pushing away the people who care about you by looking inward, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? Don't judge the answer, just listen. Because awareness doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for presence. And when presence replaces avoidance, everything begins to change. That's the moment an avoidant man stops leaving, not because someone convinced him to stay, because he finally found the courage to be at home with himself. Fear is a master of disguise. It doesn't always show up shaking and trembling. Sometimes it walks tall, confident, calling itself independence. For the avoidant man, this is the great illusion, the belief that pulling away, keeping control, and maintaining distance means freedom. What if that so-called independence isn't power? What if it's protection? What if it's fear wearing a mask? See, when a man says, I don't need anyone, he's not declaring strength, he's revealing a wound. Because no human being is designed to be completely independent. We're wired for connection, for belonging, for shared energy. But when you've been hurt, when love has come with betrayal, manipulation, or pain, the mind rewires itself to equate closeness with danger. The avoidant man learns to run toward isolation, thinking it's safety, when in truth it's just distance from healing. Fear in disguise whispers subtle lies. You're better off alone. Don't rely on anyone. Don't open up, they'll only hurt you. And because these thoughts sound like self-protection, they feel wise, they feel like control. But the truth is, Fear doesn't want control, it wants confinement. It keeps a man trapped in patterns that make him feel strong while secretly keeping him small. This is why awareness is so crucial, because the moment you strip away the disguise, you realize independence isn't about closing off, it's about standing strong while staying open. True independence doesn't mean rejecting connection. It means being whole enough within yourself to connect without losing your center. But fear doesn't want you to know that. Fear convinces you that openness equals weakness, vulnerability equals surrender, and so you stay locked behind walls, convincing yourself you're free. Think about it. How many men chase the dream of total control? The career that defines them, perfect body, the endless distractions. They call it focus, they call it ambition. But often it's just noise. It's the noise that drowns out the quiet truth that what they really want isn't control, it's peace. And peace doesn't come from running faster, it comes from finally stopping long enough to face what you've been avoiding. When you peel back the layers of fear, you find a deep longing underneath, the longing to be accepted without performance, to be loved without defense, to be safe enough to exhale. That's what every avoidant man truly craves, even if he doesn't admit it. And ironically, that's what fear prevents him from ever receiving. So, how do you break that pattern? You start by redefining what strength really is. Strength isn't the ability to walk away, it's the courage to stay when everything in you wants to run. It's the willingness to say, I'm scared, and still lean in. It's the power to open your heart, not because it's easy, but because you're done letting fear dictate your life. Once a man realizes that his independence was built on fear, not freedom, something shifts. He begins to understand that connection doesn't take away his strength, it amplifies it. That vulnerability isn't surrender, it's expansion. And that love, real love, doesn't trap him, it frees him. So, yes, fear may have disguised itself as independence. It may have told him that solitude is safety, but the truth is, safety without connection is just a polished form of loneliness. And when he finally sees that, when he has the courage to face the fear instead of worship it, that's when the avoidant man stops running. Not because someone changed him, because he finally chose to change the story. The one thing that truly stops an avoidant man from leaving isn't love, logic, or persuasion. It's emotional safety. You can't convince a man to stay through pressure or reasoning or even affection if deep down his nervous system doesn't feel safe in the connection. Because avoidance isn't a choice made in the mind, it's a reflex born in the body. It's an emotional alarm that says, I'm in danger. And that alarm doesn't quiet down because someone says, don't worry, I love you. It quiets down when he feels deep in his bones that love isn't a trap, it's a safe place to land. When a man feels emotionally safe, everything changes. His guard lowers, his tone softens. The need to control, to withdraw, distant, all of it begins to melt away because emotional safety tells his nervous system the one thing he's been longing to hear all his life. You're not under threat anymore. See, most avoidant men grew up in environments where being vulnerable was dangerous, where expressing emotion meant being criticized, ignored, or shamed. So they learned to armor up. They decided that silence was safer than honesty, that detachment was better than rejection. And over time, that protection became their identity. But emotional safety, real safety, invites him to experience something new. It says, you can be fully seen here and nothing bad will happen. That's powerful. Because when a man who's been running his whole life finally encounters someone who doesn't chase him, doesn't punish him for his distance, but instead meets him with calm presence, it rewires something inside. It tells his subconscious that connection and safety can coexist. That's when the shift begins. Here's the paradox. The avoidant man doesn't stop leaving because someone holds on tighter. He stops leaving when someone lets go with love. When the energy shifts from control to compassion, his body senses that it's okay to stay. He starts to feel that being close doesn't mean losing himself, and that's when the real connection begins, not from demand, but from trust. Now, emotional safety isn't just about relationships with others, it's also about the relationship you have with yourself. Because if you're an avoidant man, you can't expect to feel safe in love if you don't feel safe inside your own mind. Every time you criticize yourself, dismiss your feelings, or shut down your own vulnerability, you're reinforcing the same environment that made you run in the first place. The healing starts when you become your own safe space, when you can say, I'm allowed to feel, I'm allowed to be uncertain, I'm allowed to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. And if you're the partner of an avoidant man, remember this: your role isn't to fix him, it's to embody the calm that reminds him he doesn't need to be perfect to be loved. When you meet his distance with patience instead of panic, you become the anchor he never had. Not the rescuer, the anchor, the one who stands steady when his old patterns start to shake. Because here's the truth: when love feels like pressure, the avoidant man leaves. When love feels like peace, he stays. Emotional safety isn't built through intensity, it's built through consistency. It's not about proving you care, it's about showing up day after day with presence and authenticity. Over time, that safety becomes the space where fear dissolves, walls crumble, and connection grows. And when he finally feels that, when he knows, truly knows, he can stay without losing himself, that's the moment he stops running. Not because he's been captured, but because for the first time, he feels free enough to stay. There's a powerful truth most people miss when they're dealing with an avoidant man. Space is not the same as disconnection. When he pulls away, it's not always because he's rejecting you or the relationship. Often, he's trying to regulate himself. He's trying to find oxygen in an emotional atmosphere that feels too heavy, too fast, too overwhelming. But here's where things get messy. When space is taken the wrong way, it turns into distance. And when distance goes unchecked, it becomes disconnection. This is healthy. We all need it. Space gives us room to breathe, to process, to come back to ourselves. But disconnection is something else entirely. Disconnection happens when the space becomes a wall, when silence becomes avoidance, when just need a moment turns into I'm gone. And that's where most relationships start to break. Because the person on the other side starts to panic. They feel abandoned, unseen, left behind. They start to chase, to over-explain, to fill the silence with noise. And that only reinforces the avoidant man's belief that closeness means suffocation. What's the balance? It's understanding that space doesn't have to mean separation. Space can exist within connection. You can say, I need a moment, without disappearing emotionally. You can step back without shutting down. It's not about pulling away, it's about pausing consciously. That's the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is fear, it's running. A response is awareness, it's staying grounded even while creating space. For an avoidant man, learning that distinction is life-changing, because for most of his life, he's believed that if he doesn't pull all the way out, he'll drown, that if he stays close, he'll lose himself. So he disappears completely, thinking that's the only way to survive. But when he starts to experience a relationship where space is honored and connection isn't lost, he begins to rewrite that story. He learns that he can step back and still be loved. He can take time to breathe without being punished for it. That realization starts to heal something deep, the belief that love demands his surrender. And for the person loving an avoidant man, key is to hold your own ground. Don't chase the distance. Don't collapse into anxiety. Just stay rooted in your own presence. Because when you stay steady, calm-centered, self-assured, you signal safety. You show that his space doesn't threaten your connection. And that steadiness is magnetic. It invites him back, not through words, but through energy. Space, when used consciously, can actually deepen intimacy. It gives both people a chance to reconnect with themselves, to reset emotionally, to come back with clarity instead of defensiveness. It transforms the dynamic from I need to escape you to I need to recharge so I can meet you better. That's powerful. That's mature love. When a man realizes he can have both space and connection, he stops feeling trapped. He stops running. Because suddenly, love isn't a cage, it's a dance. One where both people know when to step close and when to step back, and neither move breaks the rhythm. So if you're the one pulling away, remember this: you don't have to vanish to feel safe. You can communicate your need for space. You can say, I just need a moment to center myself, but I'm not leaving. Those words are oxygen to someone who's learned to fear silence. And if you're the one waiting, remember, don't fill the space with panic, fill it with trust. Because when both people understand that space isn't disconnection, it becomes healing instead of hurtful. It becomes a bridge instead of a wall. And when love feels like a bridge, when it allows freedom and connection, that's when the avoidant man stops needing to run at all. Authentic communication, it's the lifeline of every relationship, and yet it's the one thing most avoidant men struggle with the most. Because communication, for them, often feels like exposure. It's not that they don't want to talk, it's that talking feels dangerous. Every word, every confession feels like peeling back armor that's been welded on for years. But here's the truth: until communication becomes real, honest, vulnerable, unfiltered, there can be no true connection. Without authenticity, love becomes performance, and performance always ends in exhaustion. Most people think communication is about talking, but it's not. It's about connection. It's about revealing what's true even when it's uncomfortable. See, the avoidant man has learned to communicate through withdrawal, silence, or surface level words that keep things safe. He'll say, I'm fine, when he's not. It's no big deal when it's breaking him inside, and he does it because somewhere in his past he learned that honesty only led to conflict, judgment, or rejection. He built a communication style that protected him: short, practical, distant. But protection doesn't build intimacy, it builds walls. The moment a man decides to speak his truth, not to defend, not to win, but to connect, everything changes. That's when love starts breathing again. Authentic communication is not about saying the right words, it's about saying the real ones. It's about having the courage to say, I don't know how to do this, or I'm scared, or even, I need time. When you speak from truth, even your silence becomes honest, and that honesty creates trust. For the avoidant man, this shift begins when he realizes that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's power. The strongest man in the room is not the one who hides his feelings, it's the one who can face them and still stand tall. Communication is the bridge between isolation and intimacy. That bridge has to be built on truth. When he stops pretending and starts expressing, when he replaces defense with dialogue, his entire relational world transforms. And for the person who loves him, the way you listen matters just as much as the way he speaks. Because authentic communication doesn't thrive in an atmosphere of criticism or control. It thrives where there's space to be real. When he speaks, even if it's clumsy or uncertain, don't rush to fix or interpret. Just receive. That's what safety sounds like. That's what tells him it's okay to be seen here. The energy of authentic communication is calm, grounded, and curious. Why are you like this? It's help me understand what you're feeling. That small shift from judgment to curiosity dissolves tension instantly. It takes the edge off the fear that drives avoidance. And when fear leaves the room, truth enters. But this kind of communication requires courage on both sides. It means you stop talking from your defenses and start speaking from your heart. It means you risk being misunderstood for the sake of being real. And that's not easy, but it's the only way real love grows, because love without truth becomes manipulation, and truth without love becomes cruelty. Authentic communication is where those two meet. When an avoidant man learns to communicate authentically, he stops living on autopilot, he stops assuming, projecting, or withdrawing, and he starts relating. He begins to discover that speaking his truth doesn't end connection, it deepens it. And when he feels that, when he experiences that his truth doesn't push people away, brings them closer, he begins to trust love again. That's the real transformation. Because avoidance isn't healed by promises or pressure, it's healed by presence. And presence is built through words that come from the heart, not the ego. When communication becomes authentic, both people feel free, not because everything's perfect, because everything's real, and that's what stops the running, not grand gestures, not emotional games, just truth spoken with love, received with openness, and lived with integrity. That's where connection finally becomes stronger than fear. For the avoidant man, intimacy has always carried a hidden cost. Somewhere deep in his subconscious, he learned that closeness comes with pain, that to let someone in means to lose something of himself. Maybe it was a parent who withdrew love when he disappointed them, or a relationship that used his openness against him. Whatever the origin, the message was the same: love isn't safe. And that belief becomes the script he lives by. Every time someone gets too close, that old story plays again, quietly but powerfully, whispering, protect yourself. Don't let them see too much. But here's the truth that changes everything: intimacy doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to cost you your freedom or your identity. Story you've been living, the one that says love equals pain, that connection means control, is just that, a story. And stories can be rewritten. Rewriting the story of intimacy begins with realizing that you are not that frightened child anymore. You are not powerless to the emotions of others. You can stand in your truth, speak your needs, stay open. Intimacy is not about merging until you disappear. It's about meeting someone while staying rooted in yourself. It's about saying, I see you and I'm still me. That balance is what the avoidant man has been missing: the ability to stay connected without losing autonomy, The old version of intimacy told him he had to choose love or freedom, connection or control. But the truth is, those two can coexist. In fact, real intimacy is only possible when both people feel free. It's not dependency, interdependence, two whole people choosing to meet, not to complete each other, but to expand each other. When that realization lands, something shifts inside. The fear that used to make him run starts to lose its grip, because now closeness doesn't threaten his independence, it enriches it. Think about it. Every man who's avoided intimacy isn't running from love, he's running from the version of love that hurt him. But love itself, real love, isn't suffocating. It doesn't demand you shrink to fit someone else's needs. It doesn't take your power, it mirrors it back to you. It's the space where both people can grow without fear of being consumed. To rewrite that story, though, he has to face the old one first. He has to acknowledge the pain that taught him to hide. That might mean sitting with uncomfortable emotions, admitting that he's been scared, and realizing that avoidance wasn't strength, it was self-protection. But once that awareness sets in, healing begins. Because you can't change what you won't face, and as he begins to let new experiences in, moments of vulnerability that don't lead to rejection, conversations that don't turn into conflict, his nervous system starts to learn a new rhythm. It begins to associate intimacy with peace instead of danger. Each time he stays present instead of withdrawing, each time he shares instead of shutting down, he rewires a part of himself that once believed love and safety couldn't coexist. For the partner loving an avoidant man, the most powerful thing you can do is to help nurture that new story through consistency and calm, not through trying to fix him, through embodying a different kind of love, one that says, you can be close to me and still be free. That's the energy that heals. That's what teaches him that he can stay and still breathe, because real intimacy isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding more of yourself through connection. When an avoidant man discovers that truth, he stops fighting love. He stops seeing it as something to survive and starts seeing it as something to create. That's the moment he stops leaving. When the story of love shifts from fear to freedom, from control to collaboration, from protection to presence. That's when he realizes that intimacy isn't the enemy of independence. It's the ultimate expression of it, self-leadership. That's the moment the avoidant man steps out of survival mode and into his power. For so long, he's lived reacting to his emotions, running from what he doesn't understand, blaming others for the way he feels. But self-leadership is where everything starts to shift. It's when a man stops saying, "You made me feel this way," and starts asking, "Why did I react that way?" It's when he takes ownership, not just of his choices, but of his emotional world. That's where true strength begins. Avoidance, at its core, is an escape from responsibility, not in the moral sense, but in the emotional one. It's the instinct to step back when things get hard, to avoid confrontation, to retreat into silence instead of facing discomfort. And that might work for a while. It feels safe, it feels controlled. But the truth is, it's exhausting to keep running from your own emotions. Because no matter how far you go, they follow. The only way through them is by taking leadership of your inner world. Leadership doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. It means saying, "I feel triggered right now," instead of disappearing. It means recognizing that your emotions are your responsibility, not your partner's, not your past's. The moment a man takes ownership of his reactions, his life begins to change. Because now, instead of being driven by fear, he's guided by awareness. Instead of reacting unconsciously, he responds intentionally. This is the moment he stops running from himself. And when a man stops running from himself, he stops running from others. That's why accountability isn't a punishment, it's liberation. When you finally say, "These are my patterns, and I'm ready to face them," you break free from the loop that's been holding you hostage. You stop being the victim of your story and start becoming its author. And here's the thing, accountability doesn't mean blame. It's not about shaming yourself for the walls you built or the mistakes you made. It's about understanding why you built them and choosing to build something better now. Every avoidant man who transforms does so not because someone demanded he change, but because he looked in the mirror and said, "I'm ready to lead myself." When you lead yourself, you stop depending on external validation. You stop needing other people to manage your emotions for you. You no longer withdraw to feel powerful, because real power comes from presence. It comes from knowing you can sit in discomfort and not collapse. That's emotional strength. That's leadership. For the avoidant man, this is the turning point. The moment he takes accountability, he begins to trust himself. And when he trusts himself, he no longer fears intimacy. Why? Because he knows that no matter what happens, he can handle it. He doesn't need to control the situation to feel safe. His safety comes from within. That's what makes him magnetic. That's what makes him unshakable. And for those loving him, this is where your patience starts to pay off, because once a man learns to lead himself emotionally, he stops fighting you. He stops blaming you for his distance or his fear. He starts showing up, not perfectly, but honestly. He admits when he's scared. He takes responsibility for his words, and he learns to repair instead of retreat. That's maturity. That's growth. Leadership isn't loud, it's steady. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're no longer driven by fear, but by choice. And when a man steps into that kind of accountability, he doesn't need to be chased, convinced, or rescued. He becomes his own foundation. That's when everything changes, because the avoidant man who once ran from love now has the strength to stand in it fully, consciously, and freely. He no longer hides behind walls or excuses. He leads himself with awareness, and through that, he creates the kind of connection he once thought he wasn't capable of. That's the power of accountability. It doesn't just make him stay, it makes him present. And when presence replaces avoidance, love finally has room to grow. Love without control, that's where everything begins to heal. Because the truth is, most relationships break down not from a lack of love, but from the desperate need to control it. The avoidant man withdraws to protect his freedom. The partner clings to protect the connection. Both are driven by fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. But love, real love, can't survive where control lives. It's only when both people learn to release that need for control that love finally becomes what it was always meant to be: free, alive, and transformative. For the avoidant man, control is safety. It's the invisible shield that keeps him from being swallowed by emotion. It shows up in subtle ways: keeping conversations shallow, deflecting vulnerability with humor, staying busy so there's no time to feel. He tells himself, I'm fine, because that illusion of control feels better than uncertainty. But what he doesn't realize is that control also blocks connection. You can't experience real intimacy when your guard is always up, when every interaction is filtered through strategy instead of sincerity. Love, in its purest form, isn't something you manage. It's something you allow. It flows. It expands. It teaches you things about yourself that you could never learn alone. And that's what scares the avoidant man most: the idea of losing himself in something bigger than his own control. Here's the paradox: the more he tries to control love, the less he experiences it. The tighter he holds, the emptier it feels. Because love thrives in openness, not confinement. To love without control means to trust yourself, to trust the process, and to trust that you can handle whatever happens. It's not blind surrender, it's conscious choice. It's saying, I don't need to manage you to feel safe. I don't need to protect myself from every possibility. I can just be here, fully, and let this unfold. That's what true emotional freedom feels like. When an avoidant man starts to practice that kind of love, everything inside him begins to soften. He stops seeing connection as a threat. He starts realizing that vulnerability isn't losing power, it's stepping into it. Because real power isn't about control, it's about presence. It's about being so grounded in who you are that you can love openly without needing to dominate or withdraw. And if you're loving an avoidant man, this principle applies to you too. The moment you stop trying to pull him closer, to fix him, or to convince him, and instead just love him without attachment to the outcome, the dynamic changes completely. Your energy shifts from resistance to acceptance, and that acceptance is magnetic. It communicates safety without words. It says, you're free to come closer, or you're free to go. Either way, I'll still be whole. That's the kind of love that draws a man in because it doesn't demand, it invites. Love without control is not passive, it's powerful. It's the decision to replace fear with faith, faith in yourself, faith in your worth, faith that what's real doesn't need to be forced. It's understanding that you can't hold on to someone and set them free at the same time. You can only choose one, and when you choose freedom, both yours and theirs, love transforms. Because here's the truth: you can't make anyone stay. You can't force someone to love you the way you need. But when you embody freedom, authenticity, and calm presence, you create the conditions where love naturally wants to stay. That's what stops the avoidant man from leaving. Not control, not manipulation, not fear, but the experience of being in a love that feels like liberation, not captivity. When he realizes that love doesn't demand his surrender but invites his wholeness, he stops fighting it. He starts to see that staying doesn't mean losing himself. It means finding the parts of him he's been avoiding all along. So release control. Stop trying to make love behave. Let it breathe. Let it move. Because the more freedom you bring into love, the deeper it roots itself in truth. And that's when the avoidant man stops running, when he finally feels that love doesn't want to own him, it wants to free him. Transformation through presence, that's where all the work finally comes together, because presence is what every avoidant man has been running from without even realizing it. The relationship that scares him, it's the now. The stillness, the moment where there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to project, nowhere to escape. Presence strips away distraction. It exposes what's real, and for a man who's built his identity on control, that can feel terrifying. But presence is also the only place transformation can happen. You can't change in the past, and you can't heal in the future. You can only evolve right here in this moment. Avoidance thrives in absence. It needs distance from emotion, from confrontation, from connection to survive. Presence is its antidote. When a man finally learns to stay grounded in what he feels, even when it's uncomfortable, the cycle starts to break. He begins to notice his reactions in real time, that urge to pull away, to go silent, to shut down, and instead of obeying it, he breathes, he stays, maybe just for a few seconds longer than before. Those seconds matter. They're the doorway to change. Presence isn't passive, it's powerful. It's the ability to meet discomfort without collapsing or fleeing. It's choosing to feel instead of flee. It's saying, I'm here. I don't need to run from this. That simple choice, repeated again and again, rewires everything, because every time a man stays present through tension, his brain learns that he's safe. The danger he's been running from isn't real. It's emotional memory. And the only way to rewrite that memory is by experiencing safety in the moments that used to trigger fear. For the avoidant man, presence starts small. It might be holding eye contact a little longer, listening without planning what to say next, breathing instead of defending. But those small acts of awareness begin to build a new kind of strength, one that comes not from control, but from openness. He realizes that presence doesn't mean losing control, it means mastering it. Because when you're present, you're no longer being ruled by the past or hijacked by fear. You're choosing your response. That's freedom. And for his partner, presence is just as transformative, because when you stop reacting to his avoidance with panic or anger, when you stay centered and calm, you become the mirror that shows him what peace looks like. You become the energy he can settle into. You're not chasing him anymore. You're inviting him back, not with words, but with stillness. Presence doesn't demand, it attracts. It's the quiet confidence that says, I'm here when you're ready. And that kind of energy has gravity. Presence also deepens connection in ways words never can. When two people are truly present with each other, not distracted, not defensive, just here, time seems to slow down, the noise fades, what's left is truth. And in that truth, healing happens naturally. You don't have to fix each other, you just have to be there, fully, completely. That's the space where the avoidant man starts to realize he's safe, not because the other person made him feel that way, but because he allowed himself to be here. The beauty of presence is that it turns every moment into an opportunity to grow. Even discomfort becomes useful. Every time you stay, you build capacity. Every time you breathe through tension, instead of running from it, you expand your strength. That's transformation, not through effort or analysis, but through awareness. When a man learns to live this way, he stops living in reaction. He no longer needs to disappear to find peace. He realizes peace is already available right here in his presence. That's when he becomes magnetic. That's when he becomes trustworthy, not because he never feels fear, but because he's learned how to stay with it. And that's the key. Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about being fully present with who you already are. When the avoidant man understands that the running ends, because presence gives him what he's been chasing all along, a sense of freedom that doesn't require escape. He doesn't need to disappear to feel whole. He just needs to be here completely. Because when you're fully present, love stops being something you fear and starts being something you become. The freedom to stay, that's the moment everything changes. It's the quiet, powerful realization that you don't need to run anymore. For the avoidant man, this is where the cycle breaks, where the story that began with fear ends in liberation. because staying is no longer about being trapped. It's about being free enough to choose presence, to choose connection, to choose love. All his life, he's believed that staying means surrendering control, that commitment equals confinement. But that belief was never truth. It was protection. It came from experiences that taught him love was dangerous. That closeness came with pain. That vulnerability led to loss. So he built walls. He called them boundaries. He wore independence like armor. And for a while, that armor worked. It kept him safe from disappointment, but it also kept him safe from joy, from depth, from the raw aliveness that only love can give. The freedom to stay begins when he realizes he doesn't have to protect himself from love anymore. He starts to understand that staying isn't about losing who he is, it's about finally meeting who he's always been beneath the fear. True freedom isn't about escaping relationships, it's about evolving within them. It's learning that intimacy and individuality aren't opposites, they're partners. The more authentic you are, the deeper your connections become. And here's the beautiful paradox: when he truly believes he can leave, he finally chooses to stay. Because freedom isn't given to him, it's realized within him. He stops feeling like a prisoner of love and becomes an active participant in it. He doesn't stay because he's afraid to lose someone. He stays because he's no longer afraid to be seen. That's the deepest transformation of all. Now, for anyone loving an avoidant man, this is where your part matters most. You can't make him stay. You can't love him into presence or pull him into growth, but you can create an environment where staying feels safe, where freedom exists within connection. You do that not through pressure or persuasion, but through alignment, by embodying the same freedom you wish him to find. You stay rooted in your own truth. You stop chasing what's running and start becoming what's magnetic. Because love that's rooted in freedom doesn't say, stay or I'll break. It says, you can go if you must. You'll always find safety here. That kind of love is rare. It doesn't bind, it expands. It gives both people the space to breathe, to grow, to rediscover themselves. That's what keeps the avoidant man from leaving, not control, not promises, but the realization that he can be himself and still belong. When he feels that kind of freedom, the freedom to express, to be imperfect, to open without judgment, his nervous system begins to relax. The fight or flight that's governed his life starts to dissolve. He's no longer surviving love, he's experiencing it. And that's where the transformation completes itself, because freedom is no longer about leaving, it's about staying by choice, not compulsion. Tony Robbins often says, quality of your life is the quality of your relationships, and relationships only deepen when both people feel free to be authentic. That's the heart of it. The freedom to stay isn't about physical presence, it's about emotional availability. It's about being there fully without fear. So, to every avoidant man, this is your moment. You've mastered the art of walking away. Now, master the art of staying. Stay long enough to feel. Stay long enough to listen. Long enough to see that love isn't something that takes from you, it's something that expands you. And when you do, something shifts. The walls you built start to crumble, not because someone tore them down, but because you no longer need them. You realize that staying doesn't imprison you, it awakens you. It brings you face to face with your true strength, the courage to remain open, even when it's easier to run. That's the real freedom, not the power to leave, but the power to stay without fear. Because the man who can stay is the man who's finally free.